Buenas noches. My name is Nelda Isa Marengo Camacho, and I am the Executive Director of the Boundary and Archaeology Research Center. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the final lecture in our virtual fundraising lecture series. I would like to begin by thanking all of our supporters and especially the donors whose generosity made it possible for several students to join us this evening. Thank you for helping make this event possible. And also thank you to our board members, especially Dylan Clark, who is helping us with the Q&A at the end of this session. Boundary End is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting scholars and advancing research. Our library serves as a wonderful space for academic gatherings and retreats, and we also carry out outreach activities in both the US and Mexico. As always, we warmly invite you to apply for our upcoming residential scholarships and to support our work by joining our trips, participating in our fundraisers, and helping us spread the word about what we do. It is truly an honor this evening to introduce my friend and colleague David Stuart. David is a professor of Mesoamerican art and archaeology at the University of Texas at Austin, director of Mesoamerica Center and president of the board of the Boundary End Archaeology Research Center. Many of you may know that David grew up surrounded by drawings, textiles, and books about different cultures, including the Maya. From a very young age, that curiosity and passion led him not only to early recognition, but more importantly, to groundbreaking contributions to the decipherment of Maya glyphs. His work has greatly expanded our understanding of Maya history and their complex human relationships. David's newest book, The Four Heavens, was released just last night, and this evening he will sharing some of the ideas and insights from this exciting new work. Thank you, David, for this evening.
Thank you, Nelda. Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me, and I hope everyone can see the screen, the main screen of my talk this evening, which I'm sharing. I just want to say before I get started, not only thanks to Nelda, but thanks to all of the friends and colleagues who are here tonight and the members of the Boundary End team. And I really appreciate everyone who's come in tonight to help support our efforts at Boundary End. I also want to thank the previous presenters in this lecture series this past couple of months, including Edwin Roman and Heather Hurst and Barbara Arroyo. So I'm really happy to be adding to that illustrious group this evening. So I hope everyone can see my screen. I have it up here and I have my pointer working, I hope. Please text or chat, put in the chat if there's a technical problem, and Nelda or someone can relay if I need to make an adjustment, but I hope everyone can see. So my talk tonight is, as you can see, about time. It's a bit about the Maya calendar, the Katun. And what I want to try to do this evening is expand our horizons a little bit about the ideas surrounding Maya time. I think because the Maya calendar has been known for so long, the basic structure of it, including things like the long count and the Tzolk'in and the Hab and all of these components of the calendar, this is what people learn first when they study Maya hieroglyphs, for example, and then they kind of move on to the more exciting stuff, right? So the calendar is kind of seen as this purely numbers game that you kind of need to know before you really understand Maya history and other things. And that's certainly true. It's good to know the calendar. But what I want to try to do tonight is convey some not just new ideas, certainly some new ideas, but also some old ideas that really accentuate the point that the calendar is so ingrained in the history and culture of the classic Maya and also the later Maya and the post-classic, to an extent that maybe not many people appreciate. It's not just about time and numbers, it's about cosmology, it's about rulership, It's about mythology and some foundational events of Maya mythology, which I've been studying lately. So I'm going to be presenting some new ideas. I'm going to be presenting some things that maybe have cropped up in talks in the past that maybe some of you have heard, and that's okay. This is a an evolution of a long kind of project that I've been working on, as I'll show in a second. Um, so let me go to the next slide here. And speaking of that, I just wanted to point out, I have been looking at these um, kind of, the outer limits, the edges of the Maya calendar, you might say, for many years, looking at the rituals in particular that surround period endings. Period endings being these stations of the Maya calendar that I think we all know and come across because they're so common in the rhetoric of Maya inscriptions. So I've published a couple of papers going back a number of years about stelae and stones and their symbolic role in expressing elements of the Maya calendar surrounding this idea of the tun or the stone, which we'll talk much more about. And a couple of presentations I've given at conferences lately that are looking at aspects of classic Maya religion and cycles, including one in 2021, another one in 2024, really looking at the structure of time, the structure of the Khatun, and some of new translations of hieroglyphs that I think really help us understand some new things about the deeper meanings of uh, rituals and of the structure of the calendar itself. I don't want to get too big here. I don't want to get too abstract. One of the points I want to make is that the calendar and the numbers game that is essentially what the long count calendar is actually rooted in something very fundamental and very much in the real world of my agriculture and daily life, right? So this is something that I have been playing around with a lot in the last several years, especially. And there's some new things to say about it tonight. So yeah, you may be familiar with some of this, but I think there'll be some new ideas as well. So some basic concepts. Of course, many of you know a lot about my calendar, but if you don't, what's a Khatun? A Khatun is a period of about 20 years, 20 solar years. But it's not exactly 20 solar years because the year that we're talking about in the long count system is 360 days. It's not exactly a solar year. So we have to be aware of that from the beginning. But it's 20 of those units, which are called a tun or a hab. And this connection to stones is really at the center of what I want to talk about tonight, right? So an individual tun is one of those 360-day periods, and 20 of those make a katun. So we need to go beyond the math. We need to go beyond just the structure, which is how everyone learns the calendar, right? It's very structural, very structured, but there is a lot of metaphor and meaning behind it. So speaking of stones and these units of the Katun, of course, this brings us into material culture. This brings us into things like stelae and altars, which often were the actual stones. This is what I wrote about back in the 90s, right? That and others before me, such as John Justison and Peter Matthews in the 80s, were talking about this. The idea that stelae were the tunes of the Maya calendar, material manifestations of the periods. And the thing that I kind of appreciate about this in terms of what the Maya were doing is that, a tune is the most permanent, solid material of the Maya world. And we're talking about stones as symbols of something that's very ephemeral and very abstract, which is a time period, right? So I like the way that the Maya may have been playing around with this contrast. Um, and of course, we have the ceremonies. This is what we read about in the ancient inscriptions, is the ceremonies that were commemorating these stations, these periods, katuns, and also the subdivisions of the Khatun. The thing that I really want to emphasize, and I think I've really kind of pulled together some new evidence for this, is how important agriculture was in the symbolism of time and the symbolism of the rituals that we see in the classic period, expressed both architecturally in e-groups and things like that, but also in the imagery we see of rituals. You know, we're seeing this in the language of the glyphs that's describing these rituals. It's very, very explicit, I think. Okay, so some background also about cartoons. We're not just talking about the classic period here, right? We're talking about a fundamental unit of Maya time, of the Maya conception of time, which is well known beyond the classic period and into the colonial period, in fact. So one place where cartoons come up really regularly is in the books of Chilam Balam. This is one of the books, the famous one from the town of Chumayel, a detail of one of the pages that is talking about cartoons. You can see here the word cartoon mentioned a couple of times right here and right here, right? So this is the word for the period in Yucatec Mayan. And what this is, this particular section of the book of Chilambalam of Chumayel is talking about the counting of the cartoons, these 20-year periods. There's one that happened in the year 1640, and this was cartoon one ahau. So here you see hunahau cartoon, uwuk tzit cartoon, right? It is the seventh cartoon of a sequence. So a count of cartoons, a sequence is here being talked about in the colonial period. So this is a survival of the Maya calendar well into later times, right? This is where a number of scholars first started to think about the cartoon and its significance, even before the decipherment of Maya glyphs, and even before the decipherment of the classic era calendar. Uh, for example, in the late 19th century, there were a number of scholars who were studying these books of Chilam Balam. John Lloyd Stevens was the first one, in a sense, in terms of North American scholarship. But he was channeling the work of another scholar, Juan Pio Perez in Yucatan, who was compiling these books. And here's a wonderful example. The Codex Perez, a manuscript that was copied and compiled over various years, but Pio Perez and a later scholar in around 1870 hand copied a lot of these earlier Maya documents. The originals are lost. The Chilambalam of Mani, for example, we only know it through the Codex Perez. But what you see here is kind of what we saw in the previous slide, which is a record of a sequence of cartoons. You can see the years on the left. Tut Habil in the year 1656, 1680, 1704, 1728, and so forth. And then you see over on the right, on the far right, and this is amazing actually, and I don't think many uh, Mayanists have realized this. In the actual manuscript of the Codex Perez, um, uh, Pio Perez and the bishop Crio y Ancona, uh, whoever made this particular copy, they're actually copying hieroglyphs that were in an earlier version. Uh, so this is a direct descendant. It's got to be a direct descendant of a hieroglyphic book. And here you see the glyphs, the survivals of 12 ahau, 10 ahau, 8 ahau. It's not quite perfect, right? You see some little mistakes here and there. There's a 6 ahau. There's a very nice 4 ahau, very legible, a little backwards in terms of where the number's placed, but it's a Maya hieroglyph, right? This is not something that is deciphered. This is something that's copied. So I find this extraordinary that this is kind of the last gasp of Maya writing in a record of cartoons. One thing you might notice here is the years being listed 1656, 1680, 1704. Those are not really right for being a cartoon, right? A cartoon is about 20 years. And here we're dealing with 24-year intervals. So what gives about that? it's complicated. Uh, there's a misunderstanding that happens in the colonial period. I think it's a Maya reformulation of the calendar. Maybe some of it is Pio Perez himself who's doing this extrapolation. But for a time, there's this understanding that the Katun is 24 years and not 20 years. I think the reason for that is they're trying to make it conform to for you calendar nerds out there, they're trying to make it conform to the year bearer system, and so they're fudging the numbers a little bit to make it work in the way they understand how the calendar should be. That's just sort of a side issue, but that's why you see this 24-year period, which is weird. The real point here is that these are the ancient Katun periods that are being replicated in hieroglyphs. I love this version of the hieroglyph, by the way. It looks very sad, but this one down here looks very authentic, right? Almost like a one you would see in the Dresden Codex. And this brings us to the Katun wheels, which many of you have seen before. These are many of them, some of them are from the books of Chilam Balam. The two on the right, the center one and the one on the right, are from two books of the Chilam Balam. And then the one on the left is from the manuscript of Landa's Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán. And these are clearly all versions of the same thing, and they've been copied from prototypes, and they're messy and they're kind of, they weren't necessarily aware of each other's wheels and how they were formatted, but you see how they're all similar. Um, the one in Landa has hieroglyphs, which are very ancient looking, with Roman numerals, which is a little different. But here's nine a how, 12, seven a how, five a how, and so forth. You kind of read them in clockwise fashion, I guess, here. Uh, the one from the Chumayel, again, shows the numbers, has the names written out, and also the ahau but now the ahau have become looking a bit like almost like a colonial landowner or something, an ahau, right, a lord. It's almost turned into a portrait, and then that is taken to its furthest extent here in a later version of the kawa. So here you have 13 ahau, 11 ahau, 9 ahau, 7 ahau, and so forth. These are descendant from hieroglyphs, right? These are descendant from the ahau glyph of the classic period. So that's pretty cool. What's also important here is you have this directional layout. So east is here, Lakin, Nohol is south, Chikin is west, Shaman for north. So this is a map of the world, the mundo here, with its directional quadrants, and time and space are unified, right? Or time is an aspect of space. So it's cosmology as well as calendar. And I think this is kind of suggested by some of these other depictions as well. The crosses, by the way, you might wonder, what are those? Well, those are in the eastern quadrant at the top of the map, you might say. These are maps in a sense, and that's the direction of Jerusalem. So that's why there's a Christian cross there. And of course, this is the direction of the rising sun. So there's a bit of a syncretism in this presentation. Now, a number of years ago, oh, well, before I get to that, let me just say this structure of 13 cartoons, right, repeating every 13 times 20 years, right, is the same calendar we see in the classic period, right? So when we're looking at dates at sites all over the place, Palenque, Copan, Pomona, El Cayo. We're looking at calendar records that are using exactly the system, right? So this is a preservation of the Katun count of the long count, right? So Katun Edahau, for example, if we can find it here, right here, there's 8 ahau, and here it is here, and it's over here in Landa's wheel. Well, that's this, right? Here's 8 ahau written as a hieroglyph from the classic period. And what this is doing is commemorating in the long count, the 13th Katun, 913,000. Here's another text that's commemorating the 15th Katun, which is 40 years later, on the day for Ahau 13 Yash, right? So this is a Katun for Ahau. So it's exactly the same system. It looks different, but this is a pre-Columbian system that's finding its way into the books of Chilam Balam. That's not news. Now, just to show you another example, these are commemorated on stelae all over the place. Here is Katun 17 Ahau, or I'm sorry, 17 Katuns on 13 Ahau. And this is Stela 22 from Tikal. And we'll come back and visit some of the language that's used in this inscription and other inscriptions to talk about Maya time. In fact, we'll come back to this particular Katun, 917000 on 13 Ahau 18 Kumku. This shows up in a couple of other texts we'll talk about tonight, commemorated at other sites. But this is being celebrated here by a later Tikal king named Yashnu Nain, the same name we see used for an ancestor in the early classic. Now, the structure of the Katun wheel, the structure of the Katuns in the books of Chilam Balam, is really interesting in terms of how they're talking about the nature of history and the nature of prophecy. Because what we get a sense of from those books is that each Katun had its own kind of character, its own personality. It had its own kind of prognostication involved, and a lot of this had to do, I think, with the nature of the shifting numbers on each Katun, right? So again, just going back real quick to the Katun wheels, if we're talking about a 10 Ahau Katun versus a 8 Ahau Katun or a 6 Ahau Katun, right? They have particular characteristics and certain things happen or tend to happen. These are giving the cadence and structure to Maya history in the post-classic and early colonial period. Well, they do also, I think, in the classic period, and this is something that we need to study a lot more. But we get a hint of this in Palenque, in the tablets of the Temple of the Inscriptions. This is something that Linda Sheely studied a long time ago. Barbara McLeod studied it a long time ago. Alfonso Lacadena studied it as well. I studied it some. But one of the sections of the Katun records in the tablets at Palenque concern the Katuns in the life of, guess who? Pakal, right? Pakal is the celebrated king in that funerary pyramid. So he's the focus. In fact, here's his name right here in the inscription. And so what we're seeing here, just to get a little nerdy, a little glyphy here with you guys, we're seeing a really fascinating statement about how Katuns come to be, how they're established. Let me tell you what's going on, for example. In the middle one, this is the simplest one, it's short. It says on the day 12 Ahau, the 8th day of Keh, or Chaksihom, it is the 11th Katun. A very simple statement. There's the 11 in the Katun glyph. 911000, 12 Ahau. Okay, there we are. Katun 12 Ahau, as they would say in Yucatan. And on this day, something interesting happened. What happened was Ahoyan, which is the becoming a lord. It's a verb. Someone or something is becoming or coming into the status of being a lord or a king, a ruler. And who is the subject here? It's not Pakal, right? He's not exceeding here. The person who is exceeding is a deity who is the god of the number 12. So the god of number 12 is becoming Ahau. And here you have 12 Ahau. If you go a bit earlier to the previous Katun, this is 1 Ahau, 910000, 1 Ahau 8 Kayab. seeding of the tune or the starting of the tune, the 10th Katun, blah, blah, blah. Ahoyan Hun Ishim. This is the god of number one that is becoming Ahau. So it's a description of this convergence of the number with a day name. But it's this metaphor of rulership as well, which is, I think, very fundamental. The last Katun that Pakal celebrates in his life, I'm sorry, there should be a 912-0. That's a typo. It happened on Tenahau. Here's Tenahau 8 Yashkin, the 12th Katun. It says Yilahi. Pakal sees it because he's alive still, unlike the next Katun. And it says Ahoyan, and then this is the death god, who is the god of number 10. So again, the number is becoming the Lord. It's a fascinating section of passages here. The last thing I want to say is that there's a little section here. I'm not quite sure about this, but they're characterizing the Katun in a way, almost like they do in the books of Chilam Balam. I suspect this sign out in front is a cham sign, meaning to die, maybe read as kamal hab, or chamal hab, basically meaning something like the deadly years or the years of death. And that what that's referring to is the fact that Pakal dies. He dies near the very end of this cartoon, and they're anticipating this characterization. They love the fact that the death god is the ruler, you might say. The number 10 is the ruler in Pakal's life when he actually passes away. I think they're really interested in that connection and that overlap. This also is true of the lunar calendar at the time that Pakal passes away, but that's a whole other thing to talk about at another time. Years ago, going back to the Katun wheels, Carl Taube wrote a wonderful paper where he was identifying um, pre-Hispanic Katun wheels. What did he mean by that? Well, he found examples of cartoon wheels, not as drawings on a page or carved in a stela, but as in these representations of turtles. Um, this is the best example that Carl drew and illustrated in his important paper. And what you're looking at is sort of a version, as you can see, of Landa's cartoon wheel that's just grafted onto the carapace, the turtle shell, of this very cute stone carving, the stone turtle. So you see how signs, there are 13 of them in number all the way around. They don't have the numbers on them, but the point here is that there are 13 ahows in this circle, representing time and space. And of course, the turtle is a symbol of the earth, right? The turtle is the symbol of the surface of the earth, as we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Um, as some of you have probably know as well, and I've heard various people point this out, Dennis Tudlock pointed it out a couple of times, and others. The reason for this connection to turtles, it seems very strange at first, but there are 13 segments of the turtle shell, right? This is right there. This is something that they're replicating, the Maya, in terms of the cartoon wheel, right? So this is reflected in nature. The number 13 is very important on turtles. This is part of their cosmological importance as symbols of the earth, at least in a Maya context. A couple of things to show related to that. Here's this wonderful, very famous image you all know of the turtle shell as the earth. It's the turtle shell where the maize god bursts out, the first maize, the beginning of maize in a sense, right, is shown here mythologically. Hun Ishim, the god of number one, by the way, same guy, is popping out of the turtle shell as the maize plant with his quetzal feathers, or even the leaves of the maize plant are kind of evoked, I think, by his feathery head here with the maize plant. So the turtle is the earth is something that's, of course, very common. We see it all the way back at San Bartolo, in Heather's amazing image here, her painting of the West Wall. turtle. Now, how do you see a turtle? Well, here's the turtle's head. I think it might be even a snapping turtle. Its little feet are here. There's a little claw of one of the forearms of the turtle. The other one was up here. And its body is shown as this quatrefoil. And here's the dancing maze god who is about to emerge out of the top. So this is very similar to the plate we just saw. It's just many centuries earlier, right? Um, and he's shown here as a musician. I just wanted to point out too, here's another turtle shell, right? I just checked this the other day. I was like, well, how many little segments or scutes are there on the turtle shell? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It actually matches. It works out with the one at Maya Pond. So they're very careful, I think, to show that number, that connection to cosmology, right? So they're kind of anticipating a cartoon wheel, even back at San Bartolo with this little drum. This is the drum that uh, the maze god is beating here as he's dancing, and I think about to burst out as maze. Okay, let's come back to talking about the calendar a little bit. Um, what I want to mention here, and I'm sorry to get into numbers so much, but what we're looking at here is an interesting structure within the long count that I think it bears repeating or bears reanalysis, and that is that a cartoon, a period of 20 years, of course, is 20 of these, right? It's 20 tunes of 360 days. That's what I was talking about before. And then 20 of those makes a Baktun, right? And then I'm not illustrating it here, but 20 of those makes a Piktun, and 20 of those makes something else, you know. So this just keeps going. Um, there's an interesting break in the system if you go into the smaller units. What do I mean by that? Well, the smallest unit of any long count date, of course, is keen, a single day, and 20 of those makes a winal. Uh, this is what always confuses students when I talk about the calendar. 20 winals does not make a tun or a year of 360 days. It takes 18 of these. 18 of these makes one of these. So in other words, there's a break in this system. Why am I talking about this? It's because it illustrates that the lung count is fundamentally a count of these units. It's a count of tunes, these 360-day intervals. It's not just a simple accumulation of time, of days, months, years, and so forth. There's sort of a hierarchy of time that is embedded in the system. This kind of comes up, I think, a little bit later, but the point is that this is the baseline. The fundamental unit of a long count calendar is the tune, the 360-day period. What comes below it are the components of the tune, and what comes above it are the multiples and factors of the tune. Uh, so this is really the base unit of the entire system. Something that maybe is lost when we talk about the long count in other ways. Um, Now, one potential point of confusion too here is that we have two words that are often used to mean year. I've been using tun. Of course, that's the word that comes out of Yucatec documents, but it's also in the hieroglyphs, and that's what's here on the right. This is the word that means stone, literally, but we know it also means a year of 360 days. It never means a year of 365 days. The Maya knew of the solar year. In fact, they knew of the precise solar year of 365.2422 blah 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 days. This wasn't just some sort of approximation of a year. They knew of the year. What they're trying to talk about here is a new time unit that they've come up with, which is about a year, but not quite. And it has 20 inside of it, multiple of 20. They like that. So they use that as this unit of time. So Hab is the other word that is used either for that year or for 365 days. So I know this is a little confusing. Um, there are two terms, there are two glyphs. There's a little bit of difference between them. When we see this glyph, we read it as Hab. When we see this glyph, we read it as Tun. And sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not the same. That's kind of the basic point. Hab is year, is based on the root ha, which means water or rain, rainy season. It's probably its original meaning. Visually, this glyph, as people have known for a long time, is a depiction of a drum, a teponastli, a slit log drum, the word of which, weirdly, amazingly, is tun in Chorti Mayan and also in some other Mayan languages. This is something that David Kelly has written about, John Justison has written about a long time ago. I find it fascinating. There's this overlap. It's complicated. I don't want to get into the weeds here more than I already have, but it's kind of interesting that drums are coming up here already in this talk, right? Here's the drum of the maize god as a turtle carapace. There's got to be a connection here, right? Drumming, the cadence of years, perhaps, or some metaphor behind it. But anyway, that's something that probably needs some further analysis for sure. So let's get into some of the language here. Whenever we see a record of a Katun ending in a Maya text, like this one from Palenque, this is from Temple 19, uh, the bench in Temple 19 of Palenque. We see a sequence of statements. Some of them are very simple. Some of them get to be rather informative and complicated and revealing. For a how here is for a how 13 Yash 915,000. Chumtun, this is typical of Palenque and sites in the western lowlands. Pomona, Palenque, a few other sites, but not many. Uh, most Maya kingdoms don't talk about tune seedings or tune beginnings. Here I'm translating this as the beginning stone because chum actually means more like the beginning or the foundation of something, in addition to sitting or the base, right? So it's just the beginning stone of a sequence. It's the starting stone. It is the 15th Katun, and it's also Ukaltun. It is his stone setting or stone placing or stone holding. I'll get to this in a second. This is probably the root, the ancient origin of the word Katun that we know in Yucatec. Is this larger phrase Kaltun? And I think this is a more accurate translation of it. Um, whose is it? Well, it's the king of Palenque who's named in the last two glyphs. We see this kind of language over and over again. One of my favorite examples is this beautiful panel from Pomona that shows a number of individuals, historical people celebrating a Katun ending. This is 917,000. Um, there is a ruler who's overseeing this, who's named over here in this text. In fact, that's his personal name. He's a holy lord of Pakbul, which is the kingdom of Pomona. And in his capacity as the celebrant of the Katun, he is assuming the identity of the water serpent. This is really interesting. Maya rulers are always deified in these contexts. And the inscription about the Katun is along the bottom. Here's a date in 18 Kumku. Here's 17th Katun is ended or replanted. Chum tun, and so forth. Here's that same verb we just saw. Ukal or ukalautun. Here it is a little enlarged, right? So this is a typical kind of, well, I wouldn't say typical. It's a detailed description of what is going on a Katun in the classic period. The Katun is replanted. This is interesting. Tsuts. I've presented on this before. I'll summarize that a little bit later about what's going on here. Again, it's the beginning stone, something like that for Chung Tun. It's the beginning of a sequence of 20 stones. The king is casting drops or droplets, probably a bloodletting reference, or some sort of metaphor of rain, where he is blessing or sanctifying the stone, the first stone that is set in this metaphor. And then it says, in kind of summary, he sets the stone, ukalaw tun, right? This is the sort of thing that just gets repeated in so many different Maya texts. Um, so I want to talk about this particular verb, altun. This is where our word comes from for katun. I deciphered this a number of years ago in terms of its linguistic kind of identification. Al, right, the hand, meaning, well, it has various meanings in Mayan languages, but the one that I gravitated to at the time was to fasten or enclose. That's its Yucatec meaning. And I thought this idea of binding the stones or something was the reference here to what's going on in a cartoon. Um, a number of years later, Mark Zender refined this idea, and he was looking at the word kal in a much wider context, as I should have originally, and noting that in Cholan Mayan languages it has slightly different meanings. In Chorti, it means to hold, which kind of makes sense with that hand, right? To keep or to retain. And so he proposed a tweaking of the translation of this as something like, holding the stone or keeping the stone or something like that. I've done a little bit more kind of looking at this recently, and I actually think this is the same word, and it's actually the same meaning. Like to retain or to hold or to keep is to fasten and to enclose, right? Different mind languages kind of have slightly different iterations of this core meaning, but it does mean something like to set in place, to set, to establish something in its own form. You might say to fasten, you might say to keep or retain. It's all the same word, right? So I prefer this translation of setting the stone. It's setting a stone in place. That's what kaltun refers to. And here's a slightly bigger, kind of expanded version of that here, right? What they're doing in this glyph, it's the same as this. They're just kind of bursting out the tun glyph that usually is on top of the hand, and they're putting it in another's glyph block. But it's exactly the same expression. Slightly different grammatical structure to it, but same thing. Al tun, to set the stone or stone setting, something like that. Now, this is a relatively new thing. Um, Panel one from Lakan Hadzel Tal. This is a fairly new inscription found about a decade ago in Chiapas. Some of you, I think you were here listening, have seen it in person with me in the town of Lakan Hadzel Tal. And it's an extraordinary thing. It's been beautifully drawn by Steve Houston. It's been written up and published. One of the things that I've been looking at is its mythological importance. Uh, this long inscription, this long passage, is not historical at all, even though much of the text is historical. It opens up with a mythical reference to a Katun ending. This is 13 Ahau. There you see very clearly. And why is it a Katun ending? Well, it's called a Kaltun, right? So we know it's a period ending. This doesn't exist in history. This is not a historical period ending. And none of the actors named in this long passage are historical people. They're gods, including the old men, the four old men, Gaden, right, who are at the four corners of the world, the Powatuns. Or later on, we have the water serpent as one of the actors here, right? And what's intriguing is that they describe this as the first Kaltun, the first stone setting. And the old gods here, the four old gods, are called those who are the first stone setters. That's a title for them right here. Yashk al Unach. So it's very explicit. There's an event that's happening, I think, in mythical time involving gods. And my suspicion is that this is the kind of the conceptual base date of the Khatun count that we know from Maya history. Um, now, this is not provable. I would love to have further examples of this in other inscriptions, but I did look up, and this is again another typo, I'm sorry. This should be 13 Ahau, 13 Kumku. Um, it's got cut off a little bit. It means pre-era base date, but I did look up 13 Ahau, 13 Kumku, and it's 129000. This is a date before for Howie Kumku, before this creation date that a lot of us know. It's 11 cartoons before that. I suspect that this is the date. They're not being explicit about it. They're not writing the long count, but I suspect that this is the conceptual base date of the cartoon count that we know. Now, structurally, the cartoons were long before this as well, but I think this is the mythical founding of the cartoon cycle, to put it bluntly. It's the stone setting overseen by the four old men, the four Powhatuns, right? The four Bakabs, or however you want to call them. The ancient Maya name was something like Chantun Itzam, the four stone wizards, or something like that. And here is their name glyph right here. They are the ones who are overseeing the setting of the stone. What's interesting about that is that 13 Ahau is, in at least a couple of the Khatun wheels, the first of the Khatuns in the sequence. In the east, right? You start off here and you start going around, and it's 13 here and it's 13 here. Maybe that's a coincidence. I don't know, but I just wanted to put that out there. The four stone beings, or the four stone old men, are well known in Maya mythology. Many have written about this. The best source to learn more about this is Simon Martin's wonderful paper from about 10 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, on the old man of the Maya universe, where he's talking about kind of the different iterations of this character. But here is a very clear depiction of four stones. Their bodies are shown as stones, as tuns, but they're animate beings. They're elderly guys with these watery headbands, and this is how they're referred to in the hieroglyphs. They are supports of the world. We've known that for a long time. They're watery beings, and they're the year bearers. They're the ones who hold the years in the four directions as it cycles around: east, east, south, west, north, east, south, west, north. Or maybe it's in the other direction. Maybe it's counterclockwise. Um, these are the guys who are later on called the Bakabs and the Powhatuns. And sure enough, that Pomona panel that is celebrating the Khatun ending is showing four of these individuals as these characters. Again, just like the king, they are embodying these deities in the four quadrants. And he's shown as a year bearer. Here he is holding the day for Kaban as a symbol of his role as a year bearer. We're getting into really esoteric stuff here about Maya time and Maya cosmology. So again, these are roughly equivalent to what we call the Powhatun or the Bakabs of later Yucatan. I don't want to use these words anymore to refer to them in the classic period, because we have their name in the classic glyphs. But they are parallel. They're supporters of the heavens, supporters of the earth. And again, here they are with the stony body. They are animate rocks in the four corners. Um, so we'll come back to that too in a little bit. Um, in addition, as Simon talked about, and as I think others too, the old man or the old men in the four corners as the year bearers, they're the personifications of the year. They're like Father Time. and embodiments of time. This is a wonderful old man sculpture from Copan showing him with a cartoon on his head as if he's the animate version of the cartoon itself, right? um, the place where a lot of this crystallizes, for me at least, is this image, this lintel that is from the area of Yaxchilan, showing the king of Yaxchilan, Shiljagar II, one of his underlings here, and a couple of other nobles in a cosmological scene. So what's going on here? They're actually celebrating the equinox. And what's happening, according to the inscription, is that Kini Chahau is set in the sky at the equinox. That is, he's at the midpoint of its journey across the horizon. And in this image, we see a lot of metaphor about the king as the personification of the sun, but also the other nobles as personifications of other cosmic beings. And these guys down here are two of the four corner or quadrant deities who are stones. Right here they are. They're named as real people, but that's their mythical identity in this context. And they're holding up the stone. You see, the sky here is shown as this great kind of serpent or crocodile, and it is also a stone. They're playing around here with ideas, but look at the hand here with the tune, right? The hand in the tune is the kaltun, right? This is what's shown in that same verb. So I'm going to make this direct connection here that this idea of setting the stone is this. It is this kind of image, mythically based, of the four gods who raise the stone onto their backs and up above their heads as the supporters of the cosmos. In other words, Altun, the setting of the stone, is not just about some stela. It's not just about an altar, although conceptually maybe it is, in a literal sense. Its roots go back to this fundamental idea of the earth, of the supporting of the earth. Um, and that is what's happening back here. Forgive my slides going back. That's what's being commemorated here. The 13 Ahau date is the raising of the first earth, the raising of the earth on 13 Ahau. Overseen, by the way, according to this inscription, by the water serpent. It's the rising of the stone out of the primordial waters to establish the Katun count itself. Right? So the Katun is not just a numbers game, right? It's about cosmology, and I think about this fundamental myth. Um, so this is kind of that summary statement. Um, it signifies, forgive my typos here, I was doing this kind of quickly today. It signifies the raising of the stony earth out of the primordial waters. It's overseen by the water serpent, who happens to be the deity of the number 13 on 13 Ahau, and I don't think that's a coincidence. And as Simon described the four old men back in 2015 in his wonderful article, the four old men are the year bearers in cardinally aligned quadripartite form, all of which are linked to primeval waters and to the rock from which cosmic cornerstones are made. I couldn't have put it better, right? So what's new here, I think, is this Lakan Ha text, Lakan Ha Tal, which I think puts this in a narrative context, right? As the beginning of the Katun count and the raising of the earth as stone. Okay, the last thing I want to kind of get into here are maybe some things that some of you have heard before about some of the specific language of the Katun, and I'll go through this fairly quickly. This is a record from Palenque of a straight Katun ending, 911-000, overseen by Pakal again on 12 Ahau 8K. And again, the language is what I want to focus on here. It's not just the 11th Katun, but it's the 11th Katun that gets replanted, right? Tsuts is the word. And there's another term here, ukabhi, which I have translated so many different ways over the years. It's based on the word kab, which means earth, but it means like the kind of work you do, the toil you do with the earth, if you're overseeing a milpa. And this is a term that survives in Sultanan languages today, as I'll show you in a second. So this is the language in which they're describing it. Planting and working the earth. That's the work of a ruler to celebrate a Khatun. So here's what I'm talking about. That very common phrase kabih or kabhi, which I translate as something like responsibility, but maybe more literally as like the earthwork of someone, is based on, well, this is its later reflection in Tzotzil. Chab or chob, meaning earth, but it actually is a verb that means to care for or administer, to watch over a field, that is to watch over the earth, to do your milpa. To be a shepherd is to watch over the sheep. And again, that's based on this glyph kab or chab, and this is the etymology of it. I'll skip that. The other word here is tsutz, to replant. We used to translate this as to complete or to finish, but that's not quite what it means. I've printed it on this a couple of times already. It really means to repair, mend, replant, resembrar. You can see the translations here. A redoing, a repetition, a do-over, right? This is a perfect semantic range for understanding this verb that talks about what happens when Khatuns are celebrated. Kings are replanting or repeating or transplanting the Khatun because they've happened before, right? They've happened in previous cycles. Um, the kicker here is that the original Tsut's glyph, the completion hand, is a representation of a hand holding a stick. Not visible in all examples, but in a few of them. The stick is preserved. And attached to it is a maize kernel that kind of dangles off the edge of it. And so this is a direct representation of the action of planting corn, planting maize in the ground. And that's why they're using it for this, to render this word tsutz for replanting. Okay, last few slides. Um, Going back to the tun, we talked about how Khatun endings are the setting of the stone or the beginning stone, the chumtun. Well, as some of you know, no doubt, if you are looking at records of these periods within a Khatun, 5 tuns, 10 tuns, 13 tuns, you see them written this way, right? So this would be maybe 915-500, 915-1000, and so forth. And then finally, we have a statement here. Oh, 5 tuns are still to come. They're still lacking, right? At 15 tunes, and then we get to a new Khatun after that, right? So I think this is pretty self-explanatory. They're counting stones. In other words, a Khatun is made up of years, right? 360-day years. But what they're really talking about all the time are stones. 5 stones, 10 stones, 13 stones. What gives? What's with the stones? They're not talking necessarily about stele. I want to kind of reject my old thinking that they're talking about monuments here. They're not. Um, it's something a bit simpler than that. So, simply, the basic unit here is 5, right? So 20 is 5 times 4. So there are 4 of these that make up a Khatun. Uh, and this is interesting to me because 5 stones is very important in terms of material culture, right? Think of all of the offerings that go all the way back to the Middle Formative period in Maya archaeology, where you'd find, the quincunx, right? The 5 stones that are deposited in the floors of e-groups. Or ones that Takeshi Unomata have found at Sebal, which are also from middle pre-classic. I think these are the 5 stones we're talking about, right? These are the cosmological units that are kind of showing the universe. And again, it's this connection of stoniness with the material of the earth itself. Um, this may seem like a stretch, but the power of this particular arrangement is such that it's not only found in 500 BCE, but it's also found throughout the late preclassic in offerings. This one from Ceros, and it was used up until about 70 years ago, as Raphael Girard documented among the Chorti. This is the cosmogram of the five stones that represents the universe, right? So this is almost like a preclassic Olmec offering here. I wouldn't say Olmec, but preclassic Maya, middle formative. Um, so my point is that they're using this basic idea of ritual stones to link up the units of the Khatun. But there's even finer units, there's subdivisions. What do I mean by that? Well, 5 stones or 5 years, you can have that, you can divide that in half and celebrate those units of time. At Palenque, we find this, or Tonina, there are lots of them too. And the way they refer to that is a curious phrase, chahan. It has to do with ropes and cords. Um, this is a reference at Palenque to one of these dates, the midpoint of a 5-tune period, as you see here. It's a strange kind of date, strange period ending, but it is symmetrical. It's that halfway point. Chahan means something like to coil or uncoil a rope. And sure enough, the text that accompanies this image shows a nobleman holding this coiled rope. What's the deal? There's clearly a connection here, right? This is him celebrating this minor period ending within the Khatun, but it's a hyper-specific ritual. It's very, very specific. It only happens on these dates. So what do ropes and cords have to do with all of this, right? This is the question. We have this count of 20 stones, 4 groups of five being that fundamental unit, and it's an accumulation over time. There is this ritual extending the cord or coiling of the cord. That's the first station in the entire process. It comes before any group of 5 stones is established. And at the end of this process is when you get a new Khatun being replanted. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is put this all together. Sorry if I'm going a little long here, but I think this is kind of key. Almost done. We can depict it as something like this, right? The beginning of the Khatun is the start, the foundation, the beginning. The coiling or uncoiling of the rope is here. You have 5 stones, 10 stones, 15 stones, and then you get back to 20. This is the perpetual cycle of the Khatun. What they're describing is the internal process of the Khatun. And it's about stones and it's about cords and ropes. Well, it's not a stretch, no pun intended, but it's not a stretch to see this as about measurement. Um, 5 stones. I read this ethnography by Bill Hanks, referential practice. It's kind of a classic of Yucatec Maya ethnography, where he's talking about milpas and their cosmological significance. And he explicitly talks about groups of stones and how important they are. And he talks about, hey, every corner of a milpa is marked by these things called mutuns or shu'uk, or mojoneras in Spanish, which are the stone markers. And he says, ideally, they have to be cosmological, and ideally, they have to be composed of 5 stones. 5, 5, 5, 5, making 20. I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. Because I think that's what we're looking at in terms of the Khatuns. The Khatun is a metaphorical milpa, right? It's a milpa of time instead of maize. And this process, the cord, the rope is the measurement of the corners of the cartoon. It's very much like the opening of the Popol Vuh, where they're talking about the measuring of the world, right, with ropes. Well, it's kind of a cosmic milpa. That's the same idea. So my feeling here is that this is the root of the cartoon. The cartoon is essentially an agricultural idea, but it's the agricultural realm of rulers. And rather than harvesting corn and maintaining maize and seeing that through year to year, they're working on a different time scale. They're working on these ritual years, these cartoons of 360 days. It's not tied to the solar year. It's its own system. And this is what Maya rulers are really into. So we have to have this contrast between ritual years and, of course, the natural years of the rainy season and the in agriculture. There's a real disconnect here between real agriculture and metaphorical agriculture. The metaphorical agriculture is what rulers are focusing on in their own system. And maybe it didn't work all the time. But going back to the cartoon and the earth, right? The turtle, going back to this, it is about maize, right? It's about the maintenance of maize and the recreation of this fundamental cycle, and that's also kind of embedded in this image. Think of this turtle shell as a cartoon wheel, right? Which it is in a sense, and maize is what comes out of the center of it, and that in a way is a cartoon in itself. This is cartoon one how you might even say, with him as the patron, something like that. So that's my talk, and I'm sorry I went late. I went much longer than I thought, but that's it.
No, thank you, David. Thank you for your talk. We appreciated your time.
Hmm.
So,
I felt
do you
like that was
want?
completely incomprehensible, but at least to me. But um, I hope some of it resonated a bit.
I don't know if someone has questions. Yeah, Charlie, go.
Yeah,
Hey,
I know,
Charlie.
but that was great. Very interesting. Just back to your slide of Yashilan or the
Hmm.
or the panel from near Yashilan where you have the two. I know you don't want to call them pawatuns, but the two guys holding up the sky.
Yeah, do you want me to get back to that? I
Yeah,
can.
get back to it
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
the old god down below. I don't know if you noticed, but he's holding 13 a how. If I saw that right.
yeah. So let me see.
There's an old god sitting on the skull head
Yeah,
on the
forgive my coursing through the slides here.
yeah, no problem.
So
But
yeah,
so
so
he
that's the old
13 a
man,
how. Yes,
right?
doesn't he have 13 a how in his hand?
It looks a bit like a 13 a how, and I would love it if it was a 13 a how, Charlie, but it's actually um, it's not an a how sign. That is a fusion of two glyphs that read
Uh,
as Chab and Akbal or Akab.
okay,
And that's this couplet that is rather
for the
rather
sacrifice.
obscure. It's this couplet term that it means penance and
That's good.
darkness, right? And it's something like it's basically a term for sacrifice
Hmm.
in the glyphs. And so this is, I think he's holding that as kind of a statement of cosmic charter of this idea of cosmological sacrifice, cosmological offering.
Yeah, and I see what you mean because I can see the thumb down now and looking.
Yeah, right, right. And my drawing is maybe not as precise as it could be. But that's the old man again. That's him
Hmm.
as the water serpent. So that's the 13, Charlie. The 13 is there
It's right there with him.
because the
Yeah.
water serpent is 13, right? And I think that's why 13 and a how is when it all begins, right? Um, the cartoon count at least, right?
Yeah, and you were showing the two wheels from the
Hmm.
balams that start at 13, which makes a lot of sense then.
And this is a caveat. In the books of Chilam Balam, they don't explicitly say that it starts on 13. I think they say something quite different. But at least in the cartoon wheels, they have it kind of set that way.
Well, and it's in the east, right? Which
Yeah, it's in the
presume,
east. That's right. Yeah. So which is where it should begin.
yeah. No,
Hey,
very interesting.
David,
Thank you.
Yes, is
David,
that Rick?
this,
Yeah.
this, yeah, this is Rick. I was curious on the bottom of that slide, that skull and crossbones.
Hmm.
Is that the same thing that's in the foliated cross depictions?
That is, let's see, in the foliated cross, what do we have? We have, in the foliated cross, we have a big maize, jeweled maize plant in the center
Yep.
of that panel without this particular design. This is a strange depiction. Um, the skull and crossbones, almost looks like a pirate flag, right? Uh, this is perhaps a reference to um, sacrifice also, right? Because it to me it evokes this idea of what the Maya are talking about when they talk about the piling up of the skulls, and the bones of people when they're sacrificed. They use a phrase that's called the bones in the skull. So there may be some sort of evocation of that. Um, I think this is the idea too of the seed, right? The bursting seed.
Hmm.
Almost there's this kind of, again, another plant metaphor going on here
Hmm.
that has to do with the watery underworld, the old man, this idea of sacrifice as a creative act. It's taking place on this sort of plant-like image. Um, there's a lot to interrogate there. It's kind of messy for me. I'm not explaining it well, but um, yeah, I don't see a connection to Palenque that directly. Maybe to Pakal sarcophagus. I mean, that's a more direct connection. The skull at the base of that design is the seed from which Pakal is bursting out as the young maize god, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, David. There is
And
another question
yes,
for
Antonio.
Antonio. Yeah, you you're muted.
Yes. Hello, David. Now you hear me. Hello, David. Thank you for the great presentation. I have some comments, three questions. The
Uh-huh.
first one, you mentioned that the 24 cartoon cycle
Hmm.
was something that was misinterpreted by Paris and some other in colonial epoch. So the question is, have you ever found any sign of 24 cartoon on stones? That would be the first one. The second one is a comment from what you say. Edmondson talks about a ritual that was coming and in Tikal every 5 years for celebrating the cartoon. So it's very interesting on this on the
Hmm.
last slide you mentioned. Now the last one would be: have you found any end of cartoon cycle with remeros? I don't remember the word in English. Remeros with
The paddlers.
the paddlers, exactly.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
in this lecture of things you found.
Yeah. Okay, so the 24-year cycle,
Hmm.
there is no evidence of that in the ancient sources at all.
Okay.
I haven't tracked, and probably others have looked at this much more closely than I have as to where that came from. But I do think it's something that's coming out of just the books of Chilam Balam and that kind of closed network of scholarship
Hmm.
before the long count calendar was really understood well. So I think Brenton talks about it, people like that, right? But it's really not something that we can track further back than the
Okay.
uh, well, I think the late colonial period is when it really appears. So it's not in the ancient sources. The paddlers, that's interesting. The paddlers are always associated with period endings. They're the ones who are participating either symbolically in the iconography or in the texts with the ruler. There's some wonderful examples of this from uh, the very late stelae from around Tikal that show a ruler celebrating a period ending, and you see the paddlers above him in clouds.
Mhm.
And the terminology that they use to talk about the paddlers, it seems to be like that they're bathing. They bathe the ritual. And the idea here, I think, is that they're blessing it with rain. They're up in the clouds and they're bringing rain down upon the ritual of planting, right? So again, this is part of the larger agricultural meaning of these rituals, I think. We don't understand a lot about the paddlers, the romeros. We really don't understand exactly why they are who they are, why they're paddling the canoe with the maize god, um, you know, how that relates to their role as celestial cloud beings in period ending rituals. But they're part of this. They're part of this larger idea for sure. Um, I can't remember the other question you had.
No,
Sorry.
it was just a comment that Edmondson has.
Oh, Edmondson. Okay, I'll take a look at
Edmondson.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I don't want to abuse just the last comment. I have a book, I went into a very deep study that the wheels of Catunes are related with the constellations, and
Hmm.
that's the parallel cycle. And this is something I took part of it from the study of Paxton, that
Hmm.
she relates the Catunes with the constellation. So I would like to share
Oh,
it.
Meredith Paxton. Yeah, I'll take a look
So
at that. Yes, thank you,
thank you.
Antonio.
I could send it to you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we
Well,
have a
we
question
have,
from Eduardo too, I think here.
yes, but we have first, uh, so it is in Spanish. Solo un pensamiento rápido. ¿Es posible que al hablar de 5 piedras, semillas, los mayas clásicos estén haciendo eco del hecho de los agricultores tradicionales siempre ponen varias semillas al sembrar maíz? So,
So, can you say in English for
yeah,
everyone?
so that if it is possible that when you are referring to this idea of 5 stones or seeds, that the classic Maya are like recalling on this idea of the time that the modern agricultures are putting like several seeds of maize in the same spot.
So yes, there's clearly a connection there because um, I've seen in multiple sources. I haven't seen this directly in my experience, but the the planting of maize, you don't just put one maize kernel in the ground, right? When you're planting maize in a milpa, you put multiple corn kernels, corn seeds. And I've seen the specific reference. Maybe it's in Betty Faust's book or in others that you put 5 seeds in the hole as you're planting. Five grains each time. And that's that cosmological number again, right? So that's the connection, the 5 tunes in the corners of the milpa to mark and demarcate the space, but also you're planting, there's crossover between the stones and the seeds for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I do think that the stones that they're talking about in the inscriptions, they're talking about the katun as a milpa that is gradually formed, right? It doesn't exist until it's time to be planted anew. So a katun is the process of making a milpa, and you're prepping it for the next cycle, right? You're prepping a milpa for the next katun. So it's this. I didn't really talk about this, but whereas a farmer makes a milpa in a couple of days, in terms of clear or more than that, you have to clear a lot, right? But after, it takes a while. But you're marking the land um, in a rather short amount of time before you plant. For a Maya ruler, you're doing it over 20 years. It takes that amount of time, and then you plant, and then you start a new milpa, and then you plant, and you start a new milpa, and you plant. That's the fundamental structure that I'm seeing in the ancient sources, which is pretty cool. It's a very different way of thinking about milpas, that's for sure. Yeah.
And the same, like in relation to the same question, is asking about the rope, that if it
Hmm.
is possible that the rope is also like showing not just the corners of the milpa, but also the furrow or the
Hmm.
grooves of the space inside it.
I guess that's possible. I don't know. My understanding is in traditional milpa making, the rope is very important in the measurement of the mecate, right? Chahan or kan in Yucatec is the mecate, which is the 20, roughly 20 meters. Again, that number 20, that you measure from one corner to the other, and then you take the rope and you measure the other corner. So when they're talking about the uncoiling of the rope, they're getting ready. They're doing the first measurement to establish the first set of 5 stones, which is why they talk about it that way, right? And I haven't seen it may exist, but I have not seen references to ropes in establishing the furrows of a milpa, the align, the lines. But I'm sure that could well be. I don't know. This is why I want to talk to traditional milperos, right? Very traditional milperos. I'd love to see, what their thinking is about some of this stuff.
I think on December we will have chance to do that.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yes,
Because
I'm
this
sure we
sort of
will.
thing is not going to last very long. This kind of the ideas that Hanks and Betty Faust and others have documented. This is dying now. I mean, this is the sort of traditional knowledge that is not going to last.
Yeah. So another question about the rope. Eduardo, do you want to open your mic or do you really want me to read your question?
Sure, I can ask the question. So,
Thank you.
Dave, can we assume that the rope uncoiling ceremony associated with the period ending 290 Chamchahan is different than the youth rope taking ceremony, Uchamchahan Chok?
Great. That's a great question. Um, I used to think they were the same. And in my book on Temple 19, I presented them as absolutely the same thing. Um, and it turns out that they're different. And that how I got to see that was to understand the consistency of this kam verb, which is only found in a few places, and it's always 290. The taking of the rope ceremony for kids is again mentioned in only a few places, but it's not tied to period endings the same way.
Mhm.
It's a different pattern, and it's a different verb, it's a different word, and that's what I didn't realize. So it's one of these subtle linguistic things. Um, so I would go back and revise my old, from 20 years ago, when I wrote that book, a cartoon ago, that, yeah, they're not the same in those Palenque texts. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
It's a great question, Eduardo.
We have another comment just from Alejandro, the last one, that is saying that, so echoing of this idea of planting time and watching over the territory are also found among the, I hope I pronounce it okay, Q and a Hub al Maya, who still perform a symbolic tour of their traditional mojones, known as Ilon Patan. Lafargue and those both talk about this. Nowadays, Kanjalop Al don't fulfill the whole route recorded in the past, but they still do it around September at the end of the harvest sowing
Oh, that's
season.
great. So this is like Canjobal Maya, I guess. I'm not reading it, but that's wonderful, Alejandro. Yeah, I'd love to get the reference on that. If you could send it to me, that would be fantastic. This is exactly what I need to track is the sort of ethnographic literature about this stuff.
And we have a question of Heather Horst. Have you checked out the first image from Book 4 of Florentine Codex, Folio 3? Start off at divinatory arts. Woman hold rope circle with 5 knots, manis casting stones.
Yeah, that's great, Heather. Yeah, the chords and the divination seeds and stuff. So they're the first diviners, right? So yeah, this is interesting. The connection between divination and maybe these larger scale uses of ropes and stones versus cords and seeds, right? I kind of like that. Um, Knotted cords were Mesoamerican. They were used in divination. We have really good evidence of that. They weren't just, quipus in the end in the Andes. Um, so that is what we see in the Florentine and in some other places too, right? So yeah, I have to think about that. That's really cool. I like that connection.
Awesome, Dave. I'm going to jump in real quick and kind of come off the bench here to help uh, everyone out a little bit and bring up Rick's great question. The two systems slide on that two system
Hmm.
slide that you showed, why the YEB glyph, Rick asks.
On the two systems, you mean the 360, 365 contrast, Rick?
Oh, there he is. Hey, Rick.
Yeah, you're muted.
No, if you read that, the two, four, the 8 glyphs that are on there, that B3, isn't that a conjuring or
Is this that circular stone, that drawing
yeah, your slide
from
marks it as the
El
two
Cayo
systems.
altar? Yeah, so that's I don't have it in front of me, Rick, but uh uh I can show it real
Yeah,
quick. Let's see if I can get back to it here. Um, I'll share my screen and I'll go down to that image of the El Cayo altar. This one, right?
yeah.
So what was your question?
Well, it starts off for a how 13 and then toots something and
Yeah.
and then you get down to B3, and isn't that a conjuring glyph?
No, that's the personal name of the guy who's right there. So it's for how 13 Yash, Tzutzach. It is replanted the 15th Katun. It is the stone setting, Ukaltun, of a guy whose name, and I'm now at B3, Achakwayib or Achakwayab, uh, uh, Utim, and he is the ruler of El Cayo. Ach
Okay, but
Yashnil.
it was YF. Okay, I was thinking there was
Well,
something.
you see the Y glyph. You're looking at a Y glyph, which is the same word as you see on the pots with those creepy Nawal-like beings, right? But here it's just part of his personal name,
Gotcha.
Achakwi.
Nice mustache too.
Very nice mustache. Fantastic sculpture. Yeah, there's an inscription on the perimeter of it too, which is really nice.
Wonderful. And I see another question coming in from Leah Kalinkos, who asks, could the meanings of retaining and replanting and the cycle of 20 years relate to the generational passing down of maize seeds and or agricultural land, do you think?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it could. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They're not explicit about that kind of thing. Um, the thing that I think is interesting here, and maybe that came through a little bit in the talk, is that these 20-year units of time are very generational, right? They do reflect, I think, something about the cadence of human life and the cadence of generations. So 20 years is a really good unit of time to think about. I haven't thought about that enough, to be honest, because I've been lost in the weeds of all of this other stuff. But if you step back and think about, not just the numerology and the importance of the number 20, but yeah, it is kind of a reflection of human biology and human generations and this idea of replanting every generation may be bringing up exactly what you're saying, right? Which is this kind of passing on of knowledge, this passing on traditional ways of doing things, right? So, yeah, I like that larger perspective.
I think we don't have more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so congratulations. Like people saying that it was a fantastic talk, people saying that they can't wait for their books that they just ordered.
It's coming. I guess it's coming through Amazon or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the book is out, guys. So it's it doesn't cover everything, but I hope it's interesting.
I'm going to order it on audiobook as well.
Yeah, there's an audiobook version. The Spanish editions are coming out this summer. And yeah, so
yeah, that's fantastic. We are really happy that it's gonna be a Spanish version, honestly.
me too. And the Spanish version has corrections of some of the errors that are in the English version. So it's a better edition in Spanish.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, thank you everyone. Remember that we are having our trip on December. We are going to Cobá, Chichen Itza, Ekbalam, Yashuna, that area in the Yucatan Peninsula. And then on March, it seems that we are going to Chiapas. But keep posted about our activities, our lectures, and thank you for joining us and make this to happen. Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone. I really appreciate you coming.
Thank you,
Great.
David.
Good
See
to
you.
see you.